It was a cold, foggy evening in the quiet village of Blackwood. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the distant hoot of an owl. In the heart of the village stood an old, eerie mansion known as Blackwood Manor. The mansion had been abandoned for years, but recently, a peculiar antique shop had opened in its basement. The shop was run by a mysterious man named Mr. Grayson, who was known for his collection of rare and strange items. One evening, a young woman named Clara arrived at the shop. She was a journalist, always on the lookout for interesting stories. She had heard rumors about the shop and its odd owner, and she was determined to uncover the truth. As she entered the shop, a bell jingled above the door. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with strange objects, antique clocks, dusty books, and peculiar figurines. But what caught Clara's attention was a display case in the center of the room. Inside the case were 9 wax dolls, each about a foot tall. The dolls were exquisitely crafted, with lifelike features and intricate clothing. But there was something unsettling about them. Their eyes seemed to follow Clara as she moved, and their smiles were just a little too wide. "Ah, I see you've noticed my dolls," said a voice behind her. Clara turned to see Mr. Grayson, a tall, thin man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. He was dressed in a black suit, and his voice was smooth but cold. "They're fascinating," Clara said, trying to hide her unease. "Where did you get them?" Mr. Grayson smiled faintly. "They've been in my family for generations. Each doll has a story, see? A story of mystery and tragedy." Clara's curiosity was piqued. "What kind of tragedies?" Mr. Grayson's smile faded, and his voice grew somber. "Each doll represents a person who met an untimely end. Some say the dolls are cursed, but I think they're simply reminders of the past." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to leave, but her journalistic instincts kept her rooted to the spot. "Can you tell me more about them?" Mr. Grayson hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. But be warned, once you know their stories, you may never see the world the same way again." He led her to a small table and gestured for her to sit. He then began to tell her the tales of the 9 wax dolls. The first doll, the dancer. The first doll was dressed in a flowing ballet costume. Mr. Grayson explained that it represented a young dancer named Eliza, who had performed at the manor many years ago. One night, during a grand performance, Eliza had mysteriously vanished. Her body was never found, but her spirit was said to haunt the manor's ballroom. The second doll, the sailor. The second doll wore a sailor's uniform. It represented a man named Captain Henry, who had been lost at sea. His ship had disappeared during a storm, and no trace of it was ever found. Some believed the doll contained his restless soul. The third doll, the bride. The third doll was dressed in a wedding gown. It represented a bride named Margaret, who had died on her wedding day. She'd been poisoned by an unknown assailant, and her killer was never caught. As Mr. Grayson continued to recount the stories, Clara grew more and more uneasy. Each tale was more tragic than the last, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the dolls were watching her. The 9th doll, the child. The final doll was the most unsettling of all. It was a small child, dressed in a simple nightgown. Mr. Grayson's voice trembled as he spoke. "This doll represents my younger sister, Emily. She disappeared when we were children. No one knows what happened to her, but I've always felt her presence in this house." Clara's heart ached for Mr. Grayson, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in the room. She decided it was time to leave. "Thank you for sharing these stories," she said, standing up. But I should go now. Mr. Grayson nodded. Of course. But before you leave, take this. He handed her a small, intricately carved box. It's a gift. A token of our meeting. Clara hesitated, then accepted the box. She thanked him and hurried out of the shop. When she returned home, Clara opened the box. Inside was a tiny wax doll, a perfect replica of herself. Her blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The 9 wax dolls weren't just reminders of the past. They were warnings. And now she was the 10th.